It's pretty good defense here. Mismatch, though. Oh, they're doubling him, Clark. Yeah, he's looking over the floor. The clock running down here. He's going to have to hoist it. Way outside. Oh, he put it down! What a shot! At the buzzer! Right down the middle, baby!
Welcome to the channel, everyone. I'm Hark the Sound, and I'm thrilled to bring you my first sports video game series here on this platform. I'm planning on starting an NBA 2K14 association courtesy of the NBA 2K Ultimate Base Roster project, which is an incredible NBA 2K14 mod on PC that brings to life all the retro rosters you could possibly imagine. The creators of this project have also put a ton of time into keeping the current rosters and draft classes up to date with cyberfaces that rival some of the digital creations you see in modern 2K games. Let's go through the file list here first to kind of show what exactly all is included in this project. Like I said, I'm planning on starting with the 1989-1990 roster file, but as you can see here, there's really no limit on which season that you want to pick up from. You can also play My Career files from Jalen Green and Cade Cunningham. For current times, you can also start My Careers with Jordan, Olajuwon, Charles Barkley. So, I mean, depending on whatever your interest is, there's really no limit on which era you can pick. So I'll load up the 1990 roster here to kind of break down the rosters and kind of show everyone who all is going to be included in this association file. I'm looking forward to reacquainting myself with a lot of the familiar names that I knew just from growing up in the 90s. I was born in 91. But there's also a lot of teams and players that I feel like probably don't get the respect that they deserve, given the overpowering sort of presence that was Jordan in the 90s and their dominance over so many teams in the 90s. So I'm really looking forward to not only playing against these teams in the association and learning about them just sort of like on the digital court, but I think it'll also really interest me to kind of look up the real life stories of these players and see how they were back then. Maybe look up some newspaper articles or check out some videos, highlight videos on YouTube of like some of those older games. That's really what inspired me to kind of get this project started, was after downloading this awesome mod, and why I wanted to play with sort of a retro roster is I feel like I've explored so many of the storylines in the current 2K games with a lot of different teams, and I always have sort of struggled with picking a team and sticking with them, just because I don't know, I always feel like I want my association files after a while to sort of mimic how the real life games and trades and draft picks, how those sort of turn out. So I think if detaching myself from that a little bit and exploring an era in starting with 89 and 90, it'll be a really fun project for me to undertake, kind of seeing how the NBA will play out by resetting the league, I guess. So I think it'll be fun to reset the league back to 89-90 and really explore how the teams and players and the coaches and the draft picks, like how all of those names that we're familiar with, just based on how they performed in real life, how they'll do here in 2K and in this mod. I think, like I said, there's a lot of teams and players that are interesting, and I'm looking forward to kind of seeing how they do in the file. Speaking of teams haunted by Chicago and Michael Jordan in the 90s, here you have the New York Knicks. So how will they sort of overcome that hump that they encountered in real life and win a long-awaited championship and bring it home to the New York fans? Who will they pair with Patrick Ewing? Perhaps it'll be someone in one of our future draft classes. It'll be really interesting to kind of keep track of. And we also have Magic Johnson. He obviously is not going to contract HIV in this association file, so will he be able to take advantage of getting some of his prime playing years back and help the Lakers cap his career with a championship or two before he wraps up his career? Here's Sam Bowie, who we all know was taken before Jordan in the 84 draft. He's the best best rated player on the New Jersey Nets at the moment. So will he have some digital redemption, I guess, and rebound from kind of the rocky start that he had at the beginning of his career and overcome his injuries and perhaps turn into a pretty good player? These are just a few of the storylines I'm really intrigued by. You have so many other teams and players that are interesting. Reggie Miller on the Pacers. Here are the Detroit Pistons, who are coming off their championship in the 88-89 season. They have swept Magic and the Lakers. In real life, in the 89-90 season, they defeated the Portland Trail Blazers and repeated. So in this association that we're about to start, will they repeat like they did in real life? We'll have to see. San Antonio Spurs, here's a dynasty that happens later on that we're all familiar with, but in the late 80s, early 90s, they're kind of just building out their roster. David Robinson is already one of the best players in the league as a rookie. I mean, he's a complete stud. So will he, help the Spurs attain a lot of that success that they experienced in real life down the road? So just another historical footnote to keep track of. Kind of going through the rest of the teams here. The Warriors are a pretty interesting team led by Chris Mullin. You have here the Trailblazers, who in real life made the finals in the 89-90 season. Clyde Drexler was obviously the headliner there. One of the more underappreciated players in that era, I would say. I think a lot of the reason that he doesn't get some of the love that you might expect for someone with those numbers that he posted was just because he was overshadowed by Jordan and never came through and won a championship during his prime years, even though he did have a few good seasons later in his career with the Houston Rockets, I believe. So we'll be interested to see if he can help the Trailblazers get over the hump. And sort of wrapping up, going through the file here, you can kind of see some of the East and West All-Stars, a lot of familiar names here that you may love or hate depending on your allegiance. So some really strong players here to kind of see and keep track of. And will they attain All-Star status in the association file that I'm planning on starting, or will they fall off the map quickly? We'll have to wait and see. So all storylines to keep track of and be interested in. Before I reveal which franchise I'm planning on starting this association with, I wanted to give a quick breakdown of the 88-89 season and to give everyone sort of what the landscape looks like in the NBA as we start this association, as I'll play some Detroit Pistons and Chicago Bulls, CPU action with the awesome NBC graphics to boot. So obviously the Pistons won in the 88-89 season. They swept the Lakers in the finals. It was after winning 63 games during the regular season. The Bulls actually struggled for the Jordan Pippen era anyway, with 47 wins that year, but they won against the Cavaliers in the first round, the Eastern Conference first round, in what was Jordan's one of his most famous plays with the shot in Game 5 in Cleveland. So they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals that year against Detroit, but lost in 6 games, and it was actually one more year until they could get over the Pistons hump, as they lost in this 89-90 season that we're about to start as well. So we'll see. We'll have to keep track if they can beat Detroit. So as we get set for tip-off here between the Pistons and Bulls, I'm going to cut the footage and we're going to just jump right into which team I'm going to be playing with in this association file. I'm really excited to play with this team and see if I can get us out of the gutter of the NBA. And that team's going to be the Miami Heat. What better place to start? A team that won 15 games last year in their first season as an expansion team. They and the Charlotte Hornets were in their first years the season before, so we'll be interested to see if I can get this team on track. They have some pretty good players, but they also have a lot of roster building that still needs to be done. So the first guard I clicked on was Sherman Douglas, nicknamed the General. Douglas is a second round pick going into his rookie year with the Heat. He was the first pick in the second round, drafted 28th overall. And in comparison to real life, Douglas had a decent career for a second-round pick. In his rookie year in real life in the 1989-90 season, he scored 14 points a game, averaged 7.5 assists, and almost 2 steals a game. Definitely not an outside shooter by any means, but shot decently well from two-point range at 49%. So a pretty good debut season, like I said, especially for a second-round pick. Now we'll jump to one of the headliners on this team for this year and for the foreseeable future. That's going to be Glenn Rice. He's also a rookie, but he was drafted in the first round, 4th pick overall out of Michigan. I think a lot of people are familiar with Glenn Rice's name. His son also had a pretty successful stint at Michigan and was on some pretty good teams at Michigan. And his dad was definitely a really good player for the Heat for a number of years, and then some people may remember that he was on a couple of pretty good Lakers teams in the late 90s into 2000 as well and helped them win a championship. So Glenn Rice is definitely going to be a great player for the Heat in this association. He's a good outside shooter. In real life, entering the 1989-90 season, he averaged 13.5 points, 4.6 rebounds, almost 2 assists per game, and then his production steadily increased from there. His peak season in Miami was the 91-92 season, where he averaged 22 points per game, 5 rebounds, 2.5 assists roughly, and shot 39% from 3 and 47% from the field. So I expect Glenn Rice to have a similar sort of production for me in this association file, and I think he might even exceed that. And I expect he'll take on a large load of the shots, considering there's not a lot of great outside shooting on the team, as you'll kind of see as I've been scrolling through a number of the other sort of role players that you'll find on the roster. The last player I wanted to highlight in this breakdown of the Miami Heat's roster is big man Ronnie Cycli, and he was the first draft pick in Miami Heat history heading into their first season. I'd actually never heard of Ronnie before. He's actually out of Syracuse and not Temple like it says here in the file, but he ended up putting together a pretty stellar career for himself, especially during his Miami years. He averaged 10.9 points and 7 rebounds per game in his rookie season in 88-89, and then his production increased from there. He averaged 16.6 points per game and 10.5 rebounds per game in the 89-90 season in real life, and was in Miami for a few years after that and averaged a double-double every year, around 16, 17 points per game and nearly 12 rebounds a game in some of those seasons. So he carved out a pretty good role for himself in the NBA, and now it's pretty interesting how he is a real estate mogul and a DJ in real life and lives in Miami. So an interesting character to follow here in this association. I think with Sherman Douglas at point guard, Glenn Rice on the wing, and Ronnie in the middle, we have a good young nucleus to build around as we head into our first season in Miami. Ronnie with a pretty good putback there after the initial miss to put us ahead 2-0 here, as I started a practice session between the starters and the backups just to kind of get a feel for the players, their tendencies, what they're good at, what they're not good at. I kind of wanted to play around in a practice session with the team. I went into some play now games with this Heat team against some of the better teams from this roster file. So like the Knicks, I played against them for a little bit. I've played against the Bulls for a little bit, just to kind of see and compare how would some of the better teams do against this pretty mediocre, putting it nicely, Heat squad. And I was happy to see that those teams put us away pretty good early on in those games. So I feel good about the slider set that I'm using, just the settings overall. I think we'll have a good baseline, and obviously I'll continue to make it a little more difficult as I go along, as I get used to the gameplay. I still play NBA 2K22 on the side as I'll kind of get this project rolling. So there might be some times where I get the controls mixed up, or I have some reads where I mess them up because I don't get the buttons quite right, or just the way that the physics are in this game are a little bit different than modern 2Ks. But overall, I love the way this game plays. I think the animations and just the control that you have of the players, it goes way beyond, I feel like, what I can do with the players in 2K22. My favorite 2K from recently was NBA 2K20. 22 is a pretty good iteration, but I feel like for what I was looking for with a long-term association, I just wanted to take over a classic roster, and I think this mod that includes, the NBC graphics that you've kind of seen throughout this video and the scoreboard that you see in the bottom right, just little things like that really bring that feel to this association, along with the roster files that are included. What I'll be able to do is use an editor, the Red MC editor, to edit my stadiums, the arenas, the courts, the uniforms, all of that for not only my Heat team, but for all the other teams in this association. So you'll kind of see as I start here in the 89-90 season and progress through the 90s, and obviously teams, court art, uniforms, all that changes. I'll be able to update those in real time as we go through those seasons, which is pretty awesome, because I'll be using the roster files that are included in this mod as sort of a base, and I can copy over the right coding and all that from the rosters into this association. So as I'm going along, it'll be really fun to update the uniforms as they kind of happen in real life. I know that the Heat have a pretty good uniform set. I'm a fan of the Heat's historical sort of uniforms, their first iteration that goes through much of the 90s, all the way through the kind of like the Alonzo Mourning years, and then you kind of see them change to the more modern look in the early 2000s, and they've pretty much kept those uniforms the same for much of the last 20 years. I mean, obviously they included a lot of different alternate sets, but just the base home and away, you kind of see those continue on for pretty consistently. And there's a lot of other teams that have obviously changed their uniforms. We'll see some of the horrible Cavaliers sets from the late 90s appear at some point, assuming I can get that far in association. I was actually thinking about using the Cavaliers at first because I thought it'd be a fun storyline to take over the team that lost in such heartbreaking fashion to Jordan and the Bulls in the year after the shot. But I eventually settled on wanting to do a full rebuild. I felt like the Cavs roster in this roster file was a little too good to start off for my liking. They had Mark Price, who kind of went viral on Twitter recently for showing off, his skill set and how it would be a great fit in the modern NBA, as Sherman Douglas gets a steal here in the full court. As you can kind of see, I'm still struggling a little bit to put away the second team with my first team players here. It's only 12-10 in my favor right now. I think I was able to wear down the backups as this went along, and Sherman Douglas and Glenn Rice really put their mark on this scrimmage as it progressed. So I think they're going to be two major players for us. But going back real quick to the other team I was considering, the Cavs, with Brad Doherty, Craig Elo, Larry Nance, who was a beast in some of the exhibition games I was playing in. I think their roster was just a little too good for my liking, so that's why I've settled on the Heat, coming off the worst record in the NBA the previous year. And I live in Miami now. We just my wife and I just moved down here last month. I think they're the perfect team to start this rebuild with. A little bit about how I like to run association files. I prefer more of a realistic approach to them. I know it's not that difficult to sort of cheese the CPU in trades and trade, players for high draft picks and accumulate, the first, second, third picks in the draft and quickly rebuild that way. But I'm not planning on doing that. I'm planning on taking a realistic approach to roster building, and just the way that I'm planning on playing this association in general is just going to be much more of a realistic approach. I'm a big fan of Mr. Hurricane here on YouTube. I don't know if any of you guys watch him, but he obviously does more football videos. But I really like his style and the way he goes about rebuilding franchises. And that's kind of the approach that I want to take as well here in this basketball iteration of what I'm trying to do as Sherman Douglas with a nice Euro step here to help put the starters up 18-14. So I think as the backups really start to bog down on offense here in the second half of this scrimmage, they get a little tired too. You'll see their fatigue kind of deplete and their energy bars get a little low. And then that's when Glenn Rice he's just a tank as he drives in for the layup there. I'm going to have so much fun with him. I'm going to have a lot of fun with Sherman Douglas. He's a real pest on defense. He's not that great of a shooter, unfortunately, so as he gets a deflection there. Actually, that might not have been Sherman. That might have been my shooting guard. But Sherman is an excellent defender in some of the practices that I've been playing around in. But really, I think what's going to be the downfall, at least of this first iteration of this Heat team, is going to be the shooting. I mean, Sherman can't shoot. I have a starting shooting guard who is also not very proficient from outside the arc either. So, Glenn Rice is really the only offensive weapon that I have that I feel comfortable shooting from outside with. I'm really looking forward to getting Ronnie in the post. There'll be a lot of work with him down there as I brick another three. It's a pretty common theme in this training, but Glenn Rice is there to save it, bail out the possession, and go in for a strong layup. So I think I'll have to rely on playing really good defense, getting out for fast break opportunities when I can, force some turnovers, and throw it in the post. And when the post work with Ronnie isn't working out, kicking out to Glenn Rice or penetrating with Sherman, like I do here, penetrating with Sherman into the lane and kicking it to Glenn Rice for the strong dunk there. Like I said, Sherman and Glenn really took over in the second half of this scrimmage. I was really impressed after kind of a slow start with the starters that how strong they were able to come on and really take advantage of the backups as they should. I think this Heat team is going to be one where I struggle with depth whenever the starters come out. I have a couple of backup guards that are not particularly great shooters either. They might be able to knock down a three or two when they're open, as Glenn Rice goes in for another tough shot in the paint. I just think a lot of the offensive production I'm going to have with this team, at least in the first season, is going to be from the starters and not so much from the backups. I mentioned the lack of shooting on my team that is pretty apparent. My shooting guard, Kevin Edwards, is a good mid-range shooter. You might have seen his quick release on a shot from just inside the three-point line that I had to start the scrimmage. But from three-point land, it's not pretty. You've already seen me brick quite a few wide-open threes with him. His overall is not bad, but just the way that I like to play, and I've always played on basketball games, is I don't necessarily need a scoring point guard, but I love having wings that can shoot from the outside. It's the first thing I look for. So it's going to be pretty tough to see him wide open a lot of times and be hesitant to pull the trigger. So I prefer a ratings-based experience whenever I'm playing basketball games. I just really value how they play based on their ratings. So you'll see I'll have free throw shooting set to real free throw percentage. I will have the timing, the jump shot timing turned off, and I'll have that based on their ratings. I think that's the best way to play basketball games, because if it feels like you're always in control of everything, then the players don't differentiate themselves as much. And also you could have players that are not particularly rated well in the game that you perform well with because you're so used to their jump shot. And then there could be players who are really good, but not quite, their performance doesn't quite match that. And that's because maybe the release timing on the jump shots isn't there. So I prefer that approach. So anytime you see me miss jumpers, which will still be a lot just based on the ratings of this team, at least you'll know that it's not necessarily because of the timing on my release or anything. It definitely, I mean, shot selection will still be a big part of it, but I really enjoy seeing players play to their ratings, and that's what the kind of approach I'm going for. So the end of this scrimmage is coming up. It's been a bit of a slog for us to kind of reach 30 points and put it to an end. But the nice thing that you kind of see from the starters here, before a couple late baskets by the backups, is that we took care of business after it was tied early on, and then went on a pretty big run midway through the end of the scrimmage and took control. I like the way the defense played. I think the backups made a few tough shots to get their points, but I didn't mind so much overall how the defense looked. They looked how they should against the backups. I'm not going to take anything too much away from the scrimmage based on their performance, because it is a pretty big difference in overalls between the two sort of sets of teams. As I kind of wrap up with that Sherman Douglas Euro step in the lane and reach the 30 points. So that pretty much concludes the scrimmage and sort of my spiel and showcase of the team. I'll have another video in the second episode on this channel where I'm planning on playing a game, starting the association file, playing a game, maybe showing you guys the draft class, the 1989-1990 draft class. It's headlined by Gary Payton. I won't reveal who else is in there. I mean, you can look it up yourself if you want to, but just kind of showing you guys who all is going to be the future of the NBA. And yeah, I don't know what else will be in the episode, but I'm looking forward to recording, putting it all together. I'm a little slow with getting everything processed right now because I'm still getting used to recording and audio editing and all that. Major shout out to you content creators out here. A lot of y'all make it look so easy, and this is sort of my first experience with it, and it's been really frustrating at times, but also a lot of fun, and I can't wait to bring a lot more to this channel with this NBA 2K14 association that goes back to the 1989-90 season. I'm looking forward to progressing a lot of years into this association, and I also plan on playing a few other games that I hope to bring to the channel. I'm a big NCAA football fan. I mean, I love 14. I might even bring that to the channel, but NCAA 06, 07, some of the older Madden games. I don't know yet what my next project will be just yet. I have some ideas, but for now, I want to focus on this NBA 2K14 association, and I'm looking forward to bringing the Miami Heat to you guys. So thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next episode. Talk soon.